The Love Triangle ****. On September 15, 2022, Pineville, a quiet town in the United States, was rocked by a crime that would soon become the talk of the town. What started as a scandalous affair quickly transformed into a sinister mystery that challenged the community's calm. Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old woman, was married to John Mitchell, a 35-year-old man known for his involvement in various community activities. John was seen as a pillar of the town, someone respected and admired by all. However, behind the doors of their home, a secret was about to shatter the perfect image of the couple. Sarah and John had been married for nearly a decade and, on the surface, seemed to have a solid marriage. However, what many in the town didn't know was that Sarah had started an affair with Mark Thompson, John's best friend. Mark, a 33-year-old man, was also a well-regarded member of the community and had been friends with John since childhood. Their friendship was so deep that Mark was practically considered part of the Mitchell family. The connection between Sarah and Mark began innocently enough, with casual meetings and conversations that became more frequent. Mark was always present at Mitchell's social gatherings and family events, and their closeness soon ignited a spark that could no longer be contained. Sarah, initially attracted by the attention and affection Mark gave her, found herself increasingly involved. Their relationship moved from a flirtatious encounter to something more profound and dangerous. The situation became even more complicated when Sarah and Mark began meeting in secret. They chose discreet locations for their encounters, away from the curious eyes of the small town. But, as fate would have it, a secret of this nature couldn't stay hidden for long. The tension among the three, Sarah, John, and Mark, began to manifest more and more. John, sensing something was wrong, began to feel that his wife was distant and less interested in him. He couldn't understand the reason for Sarah's change in behavior, and the small observations and behaviors he noticed only fueled his suspicions. The atmosphere in Pineville was charged. People began to notice the changes in the dynamics between the couple and their close friend. What seemed like a simple rumor quickly spread, and soon the small town was filled with speculations about Sarah and Mark's relationship. The rumors even reached the local police, who, lacking concrete evidence, could only watch the situation with growing concern. Sarah and Mark's lives became a web of lies and deceit, where each secret meeting increased the risk of exposure. The tension and fear of being discovered became a constant in their lives, and they were approaching the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. The love triangle that started as a clandestine affair was now about to have devastating consequences, and Pineville was about to discover how deep and dangerous an undisclosed secret could be. On October 22, 2022, the small town of Pineville began to sense that the love triangle was approaching a critical point. The night was cold and rainy, and most residents had retreated to their homes when the first sign of conflict emerged. Sarah Mitchell and Mark Thompson were seen having a heated argument in a deserted parking lot on the outskirts of town. The parking lot was located in a poorly lit area, away from the curious eyes of Pineville's residents. Their argument was witnessed by a night security guard patrolling the area. Although he didn't know the details of their discussion, he observed that it seemed quite serious. The security guard saw Sarah and Mark up close. Sarah's face was flushed, and her hands were gesticulating wildly, showing her desperation. Mark, on the other hand, appeared frustrated and nervous, shaking his head and speaking in an elevated tone. The security guard tried not to intervene but couldn't help feeling that something was amiss. The next morning, the news of the argument began to spread through Pineville. The rumors about what might have caused the heated discussion quickly gained momentum. Some people believed that Sarah and Mark were arguing about their relationship and the imminent risk of being discovered. Others thought the tension was related to John, who had begun to notice changes in his wife's behavior. Sarah attempted to downplay the incident, telling John that it was just a minor misunderstanding with Mark. She tried to appear calm and rational, but John sensed that something was wrong. The shift in Sarah's demeanor, combined with the recent altercation with Mark, only heightened John's suspicions. The conflict between Sarah and Mark was no longer confined to their private lives. It began to impact their social interactions. The discreet meetings that had once been the norm were now filled with discomfort and distrust. Mark started avoiding certain places where he might be seen by acquaintances, while Sarah struggled to maintain appearances despite growing difficulties. The argument in the parking lot was just the first visible sign that the love triangle was unraveling. The unresolved conflict between Sarah and Mark was starting to have tangible consequences, affecting not only their personal lives, but also how others perceived them. The small town of Pineville was on edge, and the seeds of a deeper drama were being sown. With rising tension, it seemed only a matter of time before Sarah and Mark's secret would come to light, one way or another. The atmosphere of distrust and fear was only beginning to intensify, setting the stage for the next, darker chapter of the story. On November 5, 2022, the growing fear and tension in Pineville erupted into a shocking act of violence. It was a cold and silent night, and the heavy atmosphere hanging over the town was about to manifest in an event no one could have foreseen. John Mitchell, who was deeply suspicious of Sarah's behavior and the growing distance between them, decided to confront Mark about his fears. The confrontation was arranged to take place in an old, isolated cabin on the outskirts of town, a location John knew Mark frequented to escape from daily life. At 10 p.m., John arrived at the cabin, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and fear. He found Mark already there, waiting. The tension in the air was palpable. The confrontation quickly escalated into shouting and accusations. John accused Mark of having an affair with his wife and destroying his marriage. The argument rapidly turned into a physical altercation. Mark, visibly agitated and desperate, tried to defend himself, but John was beyond the point of no return. In a moment of rage and desperation, John violently attacked Mark. The assault was brutal, and the final outcome was the death of Mark Thompson. The cabin, once an isolated retreat, was now the scene of a horrific crime. Mark's body was discovered the following morning when the police arrived after receiving an anonymous tip. The scene was filled with signs of a struggle and Mark's blood, silently spreading horror across the floor. As the news of Mark's death spread through Pineville, the town was in shock. People were bewildered and horrified by what had happened. The investigation began immediately, and the details of the confrontation were slowly revealed as the police gathered evidence and questioned witnesses. Sarah Mitchell, who had been Mark's lover and John's betrayed wife, found herself in an incredibly difficult situation. Her life was turned upside down by Mark's death and the ensuing investigation. She was torn between the pain of the loss and the guilt of having contributed to the situation that led to the murder. The stage was set for a complicated investigation. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, and the shocking truth about the love triangle and the brutal murder of Mark Thompson started to emerge. Pineville was about to face the consequences of the secret that had been kept hidden for so long, and Mark's murder would be the turning point that unearthed the depths of the tragedy. On January 15, 2023, the Pineville courthouse was bustling, drawing a crowd of residents eagerly awaiting the start of John Mitchell's trial for the murder of Mark Thompson. The case had attracted national attention, and the courtroom was filled with reporters, lawyers, and onlookers eager to witness justice unfold. John Mitchell, now facing charges of first-degree murder, was in a jail cell awaiting the start of his trial. The case had shocked the community, not only due to the brutality of the crime, but also because of the complexities of the love triangle that preceded it. The judge, known for his meticulous and impartial approach, was prepared to ensure that the trial was conducted fairly and correctly. The first day of the trial was marked by intense media coverage and a series of emotional testimonies. The prosecution presented the case with a clear narrative. John had attacked and killed Mark in a fit of rage after discovering his wife's affair with his best friend. The evidence included the crime scene, witness testimonies, and records indicating the growing conflict between John and Mark. Sarah Mitchell, who had been called to testify, entered the courtroom with a distressed expression. Facing a sea of curious eyes, she trembled as she took the stand and recounted the events leading up to Mark's death. Sarah described the complicated relationship she had with Mark and the devastating impact it had on her marriage to John. John's defense attorneys argued that he had acted under extreme emotional stress, claiming that the attack on Mark was a desperate act and not premeditated. They portrayed John as a man shattered by betrayal and unable to cope with the emotional anguish he had endured. During the trial, surveillance footage from the cabin was shown, depicting the struggle between John and Mark. The brutal images of the confrontation underscored the severity of the crime and John's desperation at that moment. The jury, composed of Pineville residents carefully selected to ensure an impartial trial, deliberated for several weeks. The judicial process dragged on, with witnesses being heard and evidence being examined. Finally, on March 2, 2023, the jury convened to deliver their verdict. The verdict was a moment of intense anticipation and nervousness for everyone involved. After hours of discussion, the jury reached a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. John Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial exposed the dark secrets and betrayals that had unfolded in Pineville, leaving the town marked by the crime and drama that had transpired. Sarah Mitchell, now alone and desolate, faced the difficult task of rebuilding her life while grappling with the pain and guilt of Mark's death and the collapse of her marriage. John Mitchell's case became a grim reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from secrets and betrayals, and Pineville would never be the same. Chapter 5: The Legacy of the Crime. In the aftermath of the trial, Pineville was left to grapple with the consequences of the tragic events that had unfolded. The murder of Mark Thompson and the subsequent trial of John Mitchell had left deep scars on the small community. The town, once peaceful and quiet, was now marked by the shadow of the crime that had disrupted its tranquility. Sarah Mitchell, whose life had been turned upside down by the events, found herself facing a future fraught with challenges. The weight of her involvement in the love triangle and the subsequent murder of Mark weighed heavily on her. She struggled to come to terms with the loss of Mark and the collapse of her marriage, as well as the judgment and whispers from the townspeople. Pineville's residents were left to deal with the emotional fallout of the case. The murder had not only disrupted their sense of safety, but had also exposed the hidden tensions and secrets within the community. The once tight-knit town was now divided, with lingering suspicions and divided opinions about the events that had transpired. The local authorities continued to monitor the community, ensuring that the residual tension did not escalate into further violence or unrest. Community support programs were initiated to help residents cope with the psychological impact of the crime. Counseling services and support groups were set up to assist those affected by the trauma. John Mitchell's life sentence meant that he would spend the rest of his life in prison, a grim outcome for a man who had once been a respected member of the community. The legacy of his crime was a constant reminder of the destructive power of jealousy and betrayal. For John, there would be no chance for redemption outside the prison walls, and his actions would forever define his place in Pineville's history. Sarah's life, though irrevocably changed, slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. She attempted to rebuild her life away from Pineville, seeking a fresh start in a new place where the shadows of her past could no longer haunt her. The scars of her past remained, but she hoped to find some measure of peace and forgiveness as she moved forward. Pineville, though deeply scarred by the events, eventually began to heal. The community worked to restore a sense of normalcy, but the impact of the crime remained a part of its collective memory. The story of the love triangle, the murder, and the trial became a cautionary tale, serving as a reminder of the fragile nature of trust and the devastating effects of betrayal. As the years passed, the memory of Mark Thompson and John Mitchell became part of Pineville's history, a stark reminder of the dark chapter that had once unfolded in their midst. The legacy of the crime continued to influence the town, shaping its character and serving as a poignant lesson about the consequences of hidden truths and broken trust.